This is the last straw. Get this off my lawn!
I never imagined my quiet suburban street could turn into a battlefield until the HOA president started parking his luxury truck on my lawn. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he didn't notice the no parking sign, but it didn't stop. Day after day, week after week, that truck appeared, crushing my grass, ignoring every polite warning. I called, I pleaded, I even left notes. Nothing worked. And then the letters started, threats of fines, fees, even legal action. All for standing up to a man who treated our neighborhood like his personal kingdom. My neighbors whispered, some laughed, some shook their heads, but nobody dared to confront him. I felt trapped, powerless, watched, like the rules didn't apply to him, only to me. And that's when I realized I had to do something no one would expect. But what could one homeowner do against a man with authority, money, and ego? The answer came in the most unlikely form, and it changed everything.
Morning, neighbor. Morning. Fine day for a walk. Hey there, buddy.
Before the chaos started, life in our neighborhood felt peaceful, almost perfect. I lived in a modest two-story home with a small front yard I took pride in. Mornings began with the smell of fresh coffee, sunlight spilling across the lawn, and the distant hum of kids riding bikes down the quiet streets. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. Everything seemed ordinary, friendly, safe. I'd lived here for years, carefully following every HOA guideline, painting fences on schedule, keeping the hedges trimmed. It felt like a small price to pay for the calm, orderly life we all promised ourselves when we moved in. But there was always one person who seemed to see the rules differently. The HOA president, a man known for his spotless yard and his sharp tongue, held authority over our community like a king over his kingdom. At first, his attention seemed harmless, almost encouraging. He'd check on flower beds, remind residents about mailbox heights, hand out polite notes about minor infractions. But there was something in the way he watched me, an intensity that didn't belong to a friendly neighbor. I sensed it would escalate, but I couldn't imagine just how far it would go. Then came the first day his truck appeared on my lawn. I stared at it in disbelief, thinking it was a joke, but the look in his eyes told me this wasn't a mistake and that my quiet life was about to be turned upside down. It started small. A polite note slipped under my door about unauthorized parking, though I hadn't moved a single car. I laughed it off at first, thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding. But the next day, another note arrived, this one more formal, stamped with the HOA logo and threatening fines. I tried to reason, calling the HOA office, but my calls went unanswered, or worse, were met with cold, dismissive replies. Then came the first fine, $150 for obstruction of common space. My jaw dropped. My lawn, the place I'd watered and mowed every morning. Suddenly, I was the rule breaker, and the president became judge, jury, and enforcer. But that wasn't enough. He started parking his massive truck on my grass almost daily, sometimes blocking my driveway. I documented every instance with photos, but when I presented the evidence, the HOA shrugged, claiming community discretion. Neighbors began whispering. Some nodded sympathetically, others avoided me altogether. I felt isolated, trapped in my own home. My frustration grew with each passing day, as petty complaints snowballed into a mountain of harassment. The president inspected my property at all hours, scrutinized the paint on my mailbox, measured my garden borders, and even complained about the color of my flowers. Every minor detail was suddenly a violation. I tried compromise, offering to meet him halfway, promising adjustments, even suggesting mediation. But each attempt backfired. New rules emerged like weeds in my carefully tended lawn, rules that didn't exist the week before. Each letter I received was a slap, a reminder that no effort would satisfy him, and the fines kept piling up.
This proves the fraud. We have to act. These are just papers, Carter. You're wasting our time. This is about justice!
The turning point came during a Saturday morning meeting at the community center. I had prepared my case, evidence stacked neatly in my hands, ready to plead my side. But before I could speak, he interrupted, belittling my concerns in front of the entire neighborhood. His smirk, his casual disregard for fairness, it was infuriating. I left that meeting boiling with anger, my sense of justice ignited. By now, the tension wasn't just about a truck or a lawn. It was about principle, about dignity, about being told that the rules applied to everyone except him. I knew something had to change, but what could one homeowner do against an entrenched, untouchable authority figure? And then, as if fate had intervened, a single idea struck me, one simple, shocking act that could finally turn the tables. The day of reckoning arrived on a gray Thursday morning, the kind that made the neighborhood look almost sinister under the low-hanging clouds. I stepped outside to check my lawn, heart pounding, and froze. There it was again, his truck, larger and more imposing than ever, parked dead center on the grass I had nurtured for years. Tire tracks had gouged the earth, and the mud clung to my carefully trimmed borders. I felt rage boiling, the frustration of weeks and months condensing into a single moment. I had already tried everything: polite requests, documented evidence, meetings, even mediators. Nothing worked. Each attempt to appeal to fairness, decency, or logic had been dismissed. He thrived on power, on the fear and obedience of others, and I realized the only way to stop him was to act decisively, creatively, and above all, unexpectedly. I spent that morning pacing, weighing options. The thought of legal battles flitted across my mind, but lawsuits take months, even years, and in the meantime, my lawn would continue to suffer. My neighbors watched from behind curtains and fences, some whispering encouragement, some shaking their heads, but no one stepped forward. The isolation had been complete until it wasn't. I remembered the expanding foam sitting in my garage, something I'd bought for a simple home repair months ago. It was absurd, almost comical, but that was precisely the point. If he wanted to treat my property as his personal playground, maybe it was time to level the playing field. I approached the truck cautiously, foam can in hand, heart racing. Every step felt monumental. I imagined the confrontation before it even happened, the smirk frozen on his face, the inevitable outrage. I sprayed strategically, just enough to make a statement, to create a barrier that he couldn't ignore or dismiss. It hissed as it expanded, taking on a life of its own, solidifying my defiance into something visible, undeniable. And then the reaction. I watched from my porch as he returned, keys jingling, ready to assert dominance as always. His face twisted in disbelief, then fury, as he saw the foam hardened across his truck tires. For a moment the neighborhood was silent. Birds paused mid-flight. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Neighbors peeked out of windows, mouths open, witnessing the collapse of his carefully curated authority. He tried to move the truck, but it was stuck. He shouted, cursed, waved his arms, but the foam refused to yield. I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in months, the sweet, undeniable satisfaction of turning the tables. He was no longer untouchable. The imbalance of power had shifted, if only for a moment. Word spread quickly. The whispers turned into conversations. Someone filmed it, someone else called the HOA office. Suddenly, the man who had dictated every rule, scrutinized every blade of grass, and humiliated anyone who questioned him, was the center of a spectacle he couldn't control. His authority evaporated in the open, replaced by embarrassment, frustration, and the understanding that his reign had limits. I didn't gloat, didn't yell, didn't celebrate, at least not openly. I simply stepped back, letting the foam stand as a symbol of resistance, and in that moment I realized something important. This wasn't just about a truck, a lawn, or even petty HOA rules. It was about reclaiming dignity, asserting boundaries, and reminding myself and the community that fairness isn't given. It's sometimes earned in the most unexpected ways. As I watched him finally retreat, muttering under his breath, I knew the aftermath would be messy. There would be calls, complaints, possibly even threats, but the message was clear. The balance of power had shifted. And the question lingered in my mind, and would linger with every neighbor who witnessed it. How far could one person go to defend what was theirs, before the line between clever resistance and chaos became blurred? After that morning, life in the neighborhood changed, but not immediately and not quietly. The foam on the truck became the talk of the street. Some neighbors laughed behind their fences, others shook their heads in disbelief, and a few came over to check on me, offering quiet congratulations or whispered warnings. The HOA president, once untouchable and intimidating, was now a figure of frustration, forced to navigate a humiliation he hadn't anticipated. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by anger and an underlying awareness that his authority was no longer absolute. In the days that followed, letters and emails flew back and forth. He demanded removal of the foam, threatened legal action, and insisted on restitution. I responded calmly, documenting everything. I had photos of the original parking violations, copies of letters and notes, and proof that he had consistently ignored the rules himself. Every attempt he made to assert power met with a quiet, measured counter. For the first time, I wasn't reacting out of anger. I was responding strategically. The community meetings, once dominated by his voice and smirks, became tense affairs. Neighbors began speaking up. Some admitted privately they had long resented his heavy-handed approach, but were afraid to challenge him. My small act of resistance had emboldened others to question, to push back, and to demand fairness. Suddenly, the balance of power in our community shifted, not through force or intimidation, but through courage, creativity, and persistence. The HOA board, faced with mounting complaints and growing unrest, was forced to address the situation formally. they convened an emergency meeting to discuss the incidents, the fines, and the complaints against the president. I attended not with anger but with evidence and clarity. I spoke once, deliberately, outlining the sequence of events, the repeated abuses of power, and the impossibility of living under a system where rules applied selectively. For the first time, the board listened without interruption. They asked questions, demanded clarification, and even acknowledged mistakes that had gone unnoticed for years. Eventually, the president was reprimanded. He had to pay fines himself for misusing common property and reversing some of his earlier punitive measures. Some of his previous edicts were overturned, minor rules were rewritten for clarity, and a few long-standing neighborhood guidelines were adjusted to prevent future abuse. It wasn't a perfect victory. Authority remained necessary to maintain community standards, but it was the first step toward fairness in years. Personally, the experience changed me. I realized that the sense of helplessness we feel when confronted with power is often more limiting than the power itself. The months of fear, frustration, and anxiety could have defeated me if I had let them. But by acting decisively, and yes, creatively, I reclaimed control over my environment and, more importantly, my peace of mind. I became an example to neighbors that authority must be accountable, and that even small acts of courage can disrupt entrenched systems of intimidation. My lawn recovered slowly but surely, and the truck never appeared there again. The neighbors who had once avoided eye contact began offering smiles, casual greetings, and even occasional words of support. Conversations that had been whispered in fear became open discussions about rules, fairness, and community standards. The atmosphere of tension gave way to one of cautious cooperation. But the story didn't end with simply removing the truck or paying the fines. Long-term, it sparked reflection across the neighborhood. People began questioning other policies, suggesting improvements, and ensuring that future HOA decisions would involve transparency rather than unilateral authority. The president himself became more cautious, more aware that his actions were being watched and evaluated. While he still held a position of influence, it was tempered by accountability, and that alone was a remarkable change. The broader lesson is clear. Fairness often requires vigilance, courage, and creativity. Power unchallenged tends to grow unchecked, but even a single act of resistance can recalibrate the balance. Sometimes systems, whether an HOA, a workplace, or even society itself, allow certain individuals to dominate through fear or complacency. But it only takes one person willing to act decisively, to push back in ways that are clever and principled, to spark change. Looking back, I understand that the act with the foam wasn't about revenge or malice. It was about establishing boundaries, asserting rights, and sending a clear message that no one is above the rules. It was absurd, yes, almost theatrical, but it was effective. And in that effectiveness, I discovered an unexpected truth. Standing up doesn't always require confrontation in the conventional sense. Sometimes it requires ingenuity, timing, and a willingness to be bold when others hesitate. The neighborhood never returned entirely to the before days of quiet perfection, but it became more honest, more engaged, and more aware. People started checking their own behaviors, following the rules, and participating in HOA discussions rather than leaving decisions to a single dominant figure. The sense of community, real community, based on accountability and mutual respect, grew stronger. And as I walk across my lawn today, now lush and green, I remember the tension, the fear, and the long struggle that brought it here. I remember the frustration of being ignored, the absurdity of petty rules, and the isolation of facing authority alone. But I also remember the moment when I chose to act, when creativity met courage, and when one small decision changed the course of my life and my neighborhood forever. So the next time you feel powerless, overlooked, or bullied, whether by an HOA, a neighbor, or any authority, remember this: you don't have to play by their rules. You don't have to endure their games silently. Sometimes the most unexpected, clever, and principled action is exactly what's needed to reclaim control, assert fairness, and inspire those around you. Because in the end, the rules aren't just words on paper. They're meant to protect everyone, not empower a single person. And sometimes, one act of courage is all it takes to remind the world of that truth.